For too long, my Necron army has languished. It is my first ever Warhammer 40,000 army, and in the meantime, Games Workshop has come out with so many cool new Necron units. So what am I gonna add to my warrior-heavy high school Necron army? 40 more warriors. There's a method to my madness. It has been a hot minute since I was building Necrons, first at my mom's kitchen table, then again when Indominus came out in 2020, bumping me up from 60 warriors to 80, and now I have 40 more to make it 120 warriors in my collection. I snagged these from my friendly local game store's used mini shelf. It's a ragtag assortment of previously loved minis. There's some fun history here. Someone was going with a super rusty Necron theme with green as an accent color. A couple of these have a wild chromy blue. I have no idea what paints they used to pull it off. And there's a fair amount of these rose gold Necrons. And there's a few classic silver Necrons that were obviously sprayed with some hardware store silver paint. You have to be careful with metallic paint. A lot of them are really thick and glossy. What looks good on patio furniture might not look good on a tiny mini. This batch of Necrons is a little beat up, but it'll be the perfect thing for my Necrons. My own army is a little beat up and well loved, so these guys will fit right at home. My Necron army is very warrior heavy. I own 80 Necron Warriors. I'm proud of those 80 warriors. I've played a lot of games with those 80 warriors. Back in the day, I was running Silvertide Necrons. But to be honest, 80 isn't quite enough. In modern Warhammer 40,000 10th edition, the maximum number of warriors you can field is 120. And that is what I feel like I need to experience to do a true Silvertide. And once I've done that, then maybe I'll get to some of the other cool new things for the Necrons. But I want to see just how far I can push the humble warrior. And all it's gonna take is 40 more warriors. To start out, I'm not paint stripping these. I don't think it'll affect the final product, even the guys whose paint is a little bit caked on. What I do need to change are these bases. I have my Necrons standing on an orangey sulfur planet, and about half of these Necrons are just standing on unadorned bases, but a bunch of them have someone else's scheme going on, so I'm gonna have to rebuild these. This was easier said than done. I'm pretty sure all of these Necrons are glued down with plastic glue, so their tiny little fragile feetsies are welded to the bases. I used my nippers to cut off the chunks of bases under their feet, which made a big ol' mess, but after that, I grabbed my Dremel tool and tried to grind off as much of the old plastic base as I could. On a few of these, the heat from the friction weakened the plastic bond and they popped off, but some of these I had to grind until the original toes were free. Now for rebasing. I want to use cork to add some variety in height. 120 Necron Warriors all flat on the floor starts to look a little bit boring, so any little variety will help. I started giving about a third of my pile some 1/8 inch cork to stand on, and for another third, I bumped it up to 1/4 inch cork. For some of these, I ground them on an angle. Having some of my warriors askew will also help give a little bit of variety to these monopose miniatures. Looking at the 3 tiers of warriors, I'm happy with the heights going on. Now to fill in all the not cork parts, and for this I broke out 3 sets of sand. Fine grain, little pebbles, and some medium grit sand. I find having everything sorted leads to better results. I used wood glue to glue down the sand. Wood glue has a little bit more tenacious grip than Elmer's glue, and I laid down a coat of this and then I gave a first sprinkling of pebbles. These sink into the glue and then lock in place. Then I gave a pinch of medium grit sand. This forms an in-between layer from big pebbles to small sand. And speaking of small little sand, I poured this everywhere else. I've tried doing this all in one batch, but I find the small sand slips to the bottom, covering up the glue so that the medium grit and the big pebbles don't stick. Each Necron's got a 3-step bath. 40 Necron Warriors rebased in my Necron scheme. Necron Warriors are uniquely easy to get a hold of. I got all these guys secondhand. They're push-fit models, so I don't need to worry about how they're built. They can only go together one way. Well, technically 2 ways, but I don't really care. Technically, Necron Warriors can be armed with Gauss Reapers or Gauss Flayers. The gun looks pretty darn similar, and they do kind of the exact same thing. One of them is 2 shots at 12 inches range, and one of them is 1 shot rapid fire up to 24-inch range. Basically the same exact gun, so I feel pretty comfortable just telling my opponent at the top of the game, all the warriors are armed with either the Reaper or the Flayer. I'm really excited to run a list of 120 Necron Warriors. Honestly, I don't think it'll be very good, but I think I'll learn a lot. I'm getting pretty good at Warhammer 40,000. I should be. I play it a lot. I feel like I can write a pretty strong list. I've played with or against almost all the factions in the game. I think the only ones I'm missing are Votann, Vanilla Chaos, and Custodes. I'm pretty good, but one thing I'm really bad at is deployment and movement. And I'm hoping with a 120 warrior Silvertide list, I'll get good at those because basically all I'll have is movement and deployment. Another thing that's got me a little bit concerned about running 120 Necron Warriors is giving my opponent a good game. I don't want to make them wait for me while I move an absurd number of miniatures. Every model in the game adds to the time, and I want to be efficient, and so Nick designed for me some movement trays. Each one of these movement trays holds 5 Necron Warriors, and so that cuts 120 down to 24 miniatures. All of a sudden, my horde of minis is basically a Custodes army. And all of these movement trays were printed using a Bamboo Labs A1 printer, today's sponsor. Bamboo Lab 3D printers produce top-notch prints, and the included software is incredible. We use our A1 to print nice lightweight terrain like our whimsical cottages, giant props like our bolt pistol, and these movement trays. We always find the need for gaming accessories like combat gauges and now movement trays, and being able to print enough for everyone is really helpful. The AMS automatic material system also makes it much easier to print different colors that could represent squad markings or match different armies by switching the colors for you. Bamboo Lab A1 is the best printer on the market at this price point, able to deliver high quality and high volume printing at an affordable price. And they make it easy to get printing with the one-click printing feature from MakerWorld with a huge catalog of designs begging to be printed. Use the link in the description to get started on your 3D printing journey with the Bamboo Lab A1 printer. Nick made these trays so that they perfectly nest against one another. I figured 5 is the sweet spot. A 10-man tray would be really big, and these are Necrons. They're all about getting knocked down, but then getting back up again. Another efficiency design is this little handle. It's tricky to pick up a model properly by its base rim at the best of times. This little handle ensures all 5 Necrons are coming with when the tray is picked up. And if any of you guys are interested, we're putting Nick's 32mm movement tray STL up for free on EonsOfBattle.com. Now, I could leave these trays in the colored plastic. Honestly, they're pretty attractive already, and the color helps distinguish the different squads. But I'm a stickler for appearances, and I want these trays to match my army. On the in-between sections of the trays, I globbed on some more wood glue and gave these parts the same sprinkling of sand as my warriors' bases, making absolutely sure that none of these grains of sand were sticking out. That would get in the way of my warriors slipping in and out of these slots. Once all my trays were sanded up, I took them outside to prime them. This took a few coats, and while I was waiting for those to dry, I got started on my warriors. Looking at these fellas, I gave each one a once-over, finding any mold lines or sprue bits that the previous owner missed. Then I gave them all a black prime. It would have been more efficient to use a rattle can, but the paint is already pretty thick, so I want to keep the primer layer very thin. After a black prime, I hit them all with a zenithal of white paint. This basically got my armor done. My Necrons have white necrodermis, so this 1-2 punch does about 50% of the work for me. Also, while I was priming, I noticed one silly little warrior has a scarab on his butt. This is a fun detail. The next step of my Necron armor scheme is a wash. I mixed Null Oil and Lamian medium 50-50 to make a dark black wash, and then I put this over every bit of every Necron. This shades all the recesses and makes them look dapper, but it also leaves me with some messy spots, particularly on their faces and shoulders, so I have to come back in and clean these up. I don't do this with a paintbrush though, I use my airbrush. Liquitex titanium white ink flows through the airbrush perfectly so I can snipe out these spots and smooth any imperfections the wash gives me, leaving it only in the recesses. My Necron scheme is very efficient. I designed it this way. White and orange was the 3rd time I'm repainting my whole collection. A big part of my hobby history has been painting the same Necrons again and again. I noticed a couple of imperfections in my warriors. On one, there's a booger trapped in his arm, and there's a few spots where the wash got away from me and pooled in an unattractive way, but I don't really mind. Necron Warriors are the lowest tier of the Necron totem pole, and I like them being beat up. They are 1,000,000 years old after all. Necron Warriors are great. Kind of Necrons in general are great because they don't have pouches or pockets or backpacks or clothing. They're nudists. They're all like one armor color and then one weapon color. And I'm done with all of the armor, so now it is time for the weapons. The weapons are pretty simple, but doing it 40 times in a row, I want to try to come up with a really efficient system for getting these guns done. My warriors have black guns with orangey glowy Gauss pipes, so to start out, I think the pipes will be the easiest to hit with an airbrush. I threw a red into my brush and got super close to the model and blasted this on. I didn't worry about flooding. In fact, I kind of want the paint to flood onto the mini. I just need these parts solid red as quickly as possible. And the Necrons conveniently hold their guns away from their bodies, so I don't have to be careful not to overspray and make their legs and chests red. In no time, I had all the tubes done. Now for the gun bits. And this was a little bit tricky. To start out, I grabbed a big brush and loaded it up with black and hit all the easy to reach spots first. This big paintbrush could do everything except the handles of the guns. I left all those bits for last, and once everyone had one coat of black, I went back in with a sharp, crisp paintbrush and carefully picked out all the handles. I was painting as fast as my little heart could paint, and all the black parts on 40 warriors took about 3 hours. The next step was a dry brush of gray over the black to pick out all the edges and details. I go with the mid-tone gray since their bodies are white, I don't want any white on the guns. Now I can hit all those tubes. I assembly line painted each front of the tube on every Necron and then I hit all the backs. Now for the energy glow, and for this I put some orange into my airbrush and turned the PSI way down until almost no air was coming out. Then when I pull back on the trigger, it just spits orange paint onto the red Gauss tubes and cords. This gives a fun texture and an alien feel to my Necrons. This is bringing me right back to high school when I was putting together my first Necron Warriors. Although in high school I didn't paint them orange, I actually painted them white and blue. Actually, the first time I ever got Necrons, I tried to paint them like the box, and that didn't quite work out, so then I went to white and blue, and then blue didn't contrast very well against the white, so I switched it to orange, and I really like the orange. 40 Necron Warriors done, and it's only taken about 8 hours. But I feel like that's still pretty good. 8 hours divided by 40. There's only one more little thing to do on these Necrons, and I really hope my airbrush is up for it. I like to make my Necron's eyes glow, and the fastest way to do this is with the airbrush. It is also the scariest way to do this. It's such a delicate operation to hold the mini in the exact right spot and then pull back on the trigger just right so just a little puff comes out and hits each eye. I used red ink for this as ink runs through the airbrush a little bit better than watered down acrylic paints. Once the glowy eyes were done, it was time to start on those bases. I grabbed a tan color, watered it down, and sprayed this over the bases. Watering down the paint will make it a little bit transparent so I can take advantage of the overspraying that the Zenithal gave me. Now I can do the red, and I have changed up my basing scheme since the last time I painted up my orange Necrons. Now I make a soup of red pigment powder with a drop of flow aid. I paint this over every part of the base so it's completely saturated with red, and then I take a squirt bottle filled with water and give each base a few squirts. This washes the pigments off the raised areas, and the more squirts I give it, the more pigment washes off, so I can control how this looks. I like to spray it until the pigments have washed off the big pebbles, but is still stuck over the small grains of sand. I find this gives a really natural look and can still be done in a timely fashion. In no time, my Necrons were nice and soggy and ready to be put aside to dry. And you know what else is a little soggy? That's right, our website. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch, like our Nick and J dice, and the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members will get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. For the month of February, we made the Grim Battlefield basing bits, and we're making them for real, available as physically printed packs or as digital STLs. These Grim bits are the perfect thing for your dark miniatures to stand on. War-torn scenery isn't as easy to pull off as texture paste in the grass tuff, but with these bits, it's easy to give your minis the Grim Dark treatment. With a selection of sandbag and barbed wire barriers, ruined walls, smashed stained glass, unexploded ordnances, and more. All sized perfectly to complement any size of miniature, from giving an upgrade to your small rank and file troopers, all the way up to big chunks of debris for filling up monster and vehicle bases, you can do it with the Grim Battlefield basing bits. Next, I went and grabbed my movement trays, which were done drying. On these trays, to have them look nice, I need to do my basing scheme in reverse. I started out by spraying them with a red-brown that matches the pigment powders I put on my Necron bases, and then I put tan into my airbrush, turned the PSI way down so the paint was spitting out, and I sprinkled this over the bases. I'm hoping this will give a nice look so that when a couple of Necron Warriors are dead and out of the trays, it'll still look pretty good. I hit all the sand with a dry brush of tan paint, doing a few layers so the larger pebbles were more tan than the surrounding battlefield. I tried these suckers out and I think they look pretty good. Now for the secret sauce of my Necron bases, Indian Yellow. This is an ink that is the most saturated yellow color I have ever seen, and I use this to tint the movement trays. I didn't hit everywhere, just randomly over 50% of each tray. This turns the tan into a vibrant yellow, and it darkens the red just a little bit. While it was in my airbrush, I put this over the Necron's bases, doing the same 50-50 trick to add a lot of variety with just a little bit of effort. On my old Necrons, I put the pigment powders on dry, and this gave me the color but not the same look. I think wet is the way to go. The last trick of my Necron army is that they're so simple, white, orange, and black, I don't want those colors anywhere else to pull focus away from my minis, so instead of black base rims, I do gray base rims. 40 Necron Warriors added to the collection, looking really spiffy in the 5-man movement trays. This many Necron Warriors is 400 points, bringing me up to 4,000 points of Necrons. Necrons are really, really good right now. Everything in the codex is great. There's really no bad choices. Arguably, the one unit that's not doing so hot right now is Necron Warriors. They just don't really hit that hard and they're not that survivable. But I think there is something to Necron Warrior spam. 120 Necron Warriors is the maximum number of Necron Warriors I am allowed to take in a game of Warhammer 40,000. and I want to do proper Silver Tide. Necron Warriors aren't doing so hot, but I think if you bring nothing but warriors and you give them every single possible buff you can give them, Cesares for the -1 AP, Technomancers for the feel no pain, Chronomancers for the stealth, popping the resurrect strat every single turn in my opponent's shooting phase, I think warriors can be really, really fun, and more importantly, fluffy. I want to do proper Silver Tide. I want to do Chumbawamba. I want an absolute wave, an implacable wall of Necron Warriors that I can march at my opponents. And sure, a couple of them might get knocked down, but they're gonna get up again. Necrons were my first army in Warhammer 40,000. I have always loved the Necrons, and my favorite thing about the Necrons are the Necrons. I don't like Catan. I'm okay with Canoptech, but I like the dudes. I like the regular rank and file, and I just love the idea of a million little Terminators walking across the board. What do? They're immortal robots. What are you gonna do against wave after wave of resurrecting ghouls? I am really excited to run this list. I'm just gonna have to run it and run it and run it and see how I can improve it and get better at it. And eventually, my Necrons will dominate the galaxy. Or at least beat Sean. Thanks for watching.